I'm now at this last section of this first lecture about Tepper, which is titled War Breeds. And this is obviously meant in a couple of different ways. That is, what does war breed, and who is bred for war? Because obviously the men who wind up in the garrisons are bred for war. And the idea is to bring back the men who are not bred for war. And so Tepper proposes that war is a dysfunction of testosterone or a male gene, then it has to be bred out. It's a habit, or it's a trait. Yeah, it's a trait. It's part of the germline, and so it has to be modified. You've got to modify, and so they're doing a selective breeding program. Now, since America's loss in Vietnam in 1975, that's when Vietnam fell, but America withdrew in 1973. It has become a given that in public you may attack politicians who make policy that is war policy, although you're going to get hate mail. I mean, you're going to get all kinds of... If you're in any way public, and these days who isn't, and you publicly go against war policy, the likelihood is you're going to get you're going to get threats, or hate mail, or something. But what you cannot do, you can question politicians, because people are like, well, politicians. Nobody likes politicians. As if we can do without them. We must have people who agree to serve, essentially, and carry our messages forward to a conclave where discussions are had. Anyway, political science. But anyway, what you can't do is question the troops, and this is considered now to be unpatriotic. Even during the Vietnam War, as people began to protest the troops themselves and say, calling the troops baby killers. This especially happened after the My Lai massacre became public and became a huge turning point, really, for the sense that America had, if it had not physically lost the war in Vietnam, it had morally lost the war in Vietnam. And at that point, some of the American public very vocally began to say to the troops, you have done wrong. You are baby killers. Tepper also doesn't cut any slack to people who essentially are bystanders, or go along with and say yes to power. And she's like, no, that's not acceptable. You're complicit. If you're complicit, if you are a bystander and you don't say no, then you are saying yes, and so you are complicit. And there's a lot of sense to that. This is also the claim that's often made against so many Germans, especially if you look at Daniel Goldhagen's book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, where basically Goldhagen says every German was guilty because they didn't stop the deportations, the death camps, the slaughters, the genocides, basically. So every single German is guilty of that, unless, I guess, of course, they're children. Anyway, the book kicked up a lot of discussion, which was good. I mean, I think it was good to have that discussion. People didn't agree. Many people didn't agree with Goldhagen. Many people did. Okay. So Tepper comes to this. You women don't understand that, says Chernin. I was asked to lie. I had to do what was honorable. Warriors don't lie to each other. I tried to tell you women that. You women, says Stavia. He flushed. I tried to explain as I had to do what Vimsis wanted, even if it was crazy, because that's what we do in the garrison. We obey orders, and we don't ask if the officer is crazy or not, on 75. So here is the definition of what came to be called the Nuremberg defense, which is, I was just following orders. And when the Nazis were collected at the end of the Second World War and brought to trial in Nuremberg by the Americans in a joint, mostly it was for the Americans really, but the Americans, the British, the French, the Allied forces, they began to hear this, people saying, I was following orders. In German, the phrase that they kept hearing was Befehl ist Befehl, which is orders are orders. These were the orders. Essentially, the order of the day was follow the command and don't question command. No, that's true for every army. People who would say, "Oh, well, a soldier in Army X wouldn't follow a bad order." It's like they wouldn't. Okay, good luck. Good luck to that soldier staying out of the brig or the jail. Very few mothers in women's country ever spoke of their boy children as warrior sons. Myra had been an exception. When her first baby had been born, Myra had used the phrase on every possible occasion. He was always my little warrior son. This is on page 87. In Myra, Tepper shows us a warrior's daughter, a woman who has signed on to the military mission and who is an enabler. She's already sacrificed her sons ahead of time and has chosen for them. I mean, it is determined that Myra's sons will be warriors. What that means is that they won't come back through the gate to women's country. They will be killed. This is part of the selection process, right? And Tepper really pities Myra. I mean, I think it's necessary for her to put in a character who, unlike Stavia, who finds her way essentially to the truth or the good way forward. That there is somebody who you can measure against her and look at Myra and say, Myra's crazy. She's nuts. She's got this military mindset. It's like that ultimately she asks, and Tepper ultimately says, be sympathetic to Myra because she's an ugly character, but we have to be sympathetic to her. She's also a mother. She's also sacrificing her children. It's worthwhile to look back at this point. It's for me impossible not to be reminded of the mothers who wrote letters to the Times of London and the Observer and the various different papers during World War I, between 1914 and 1918, from Great Britain. And they said the most spine-freezing, hair-whitening things. I mean, they just were terrifying things that they said. Because they were mothers, and very often a propaganda plea would be made to say, mothers, if you love your children, why are you letting them go to war? And the British mothers, well, who knows who answered, because it might very well have been the War Department that answered these letters or wrote these letters. So one of the famous letters that appeared in the Morning Post in 1916 was simply addressed, a mother's answer to a common soldier by a little mother. And the letter came to be just known as a little mother. And it was written to a British soldier who was in the trenches and basically said, Tommy Atkins was his name. And he basically said, this is a pointless war, and if you love your children, you should keep them home. And he was a soldier, right? That's probably that was true. I mean, it's really hard to know. You've got to see the original, but then you still don't know who wrote it. Was it written by pacifists? And there were pacifists in America and Canada and in Great Britain. There were pacifists. There were pacifists in Germany. This is World War I. In France, they generally went to jail and they were shunned. I mean, they were treated badly. I mean, they were chained up. They were literally chained up by their wrists in American prisons. And remember that America didn't go to war until 1917. So these are people they didn't know how long the war was going to last. They were like, no, we're against this. They spoke out, and they were put in prison. So anyway, this little mother writes this letter to this Tommy Atkins, who wrote in and basically said, keep your kids at home. And in part, it's a long letter, so I'll just read you a little part of it. She says, the little mother says, women are created for the purpose of giving life, and men to take it. Now we are giving it in a double sense. It's not likely we are going to fail, Tommy. We shall not flinch one iota. An iota is the smallest Greek mark there is. It's actually the dot. My memory is it's the dot over the I. So it's a period basically. Okay. A common soldier, perhaps, did not count on women, but they have their part to play, and we have risen to our responsibility. We are proud of our men, and they in turn have to be proud of us. If the men fail Tommy Atkins, the women won't. Okay, so here is this incredibly offensive militarist language that has either been written by a woman or placed into the hands of a woman. I mean, we don't know who wrote a letter like this. it really hardly matters. The point is, there are always true believers. If you say to somebody, yeah, but you wouldn't want your son to be killed or your daughter to be killed now, they would say, I don't care, anything it takes, whatever it takes. Now, I'm trying to remember, I think it's in one of the Michael Moore films. Yeah, Fahrenheit 9/11. If you look at Fahrenheit 9/11, which I recommend. I mean, it's a typical sort of Michael Moore documentary. It's like not really a documentary, but it's very good. And at one point, he starts off tracking families where the children have gone to war, and he starts off at home, right, so with them. And he finds this one woman, and she starts off, she gets out. The first thing she does in the morning is she comes outside and she raises the flag. She's got a flagpole attached to the house, and she's all in. And then her son gets killed, and she can't do it anymore. And she basically says to Moore, "What did I do? I was wrong." And it's just brutal, because she no longer believes, and so she's lost the son and she's lost her belief. Now, it's amazing that she agreed to be filmed. I think it's very powerful that she did. So there are militarists of all intersections, and they will come out with the same militarist stuff, no matter who they are, essentially, no matter what gender they are, no matter what gender assignation they are, no matter what skin color they have, no matter what their politics are. They're gonna come out with this militarist stuff, and okay. So what you have to ask then is, we have to set what Tepper specifically is after is the myth that bearing children makes peacemakers. It does not, and she wants to separate essentially the militarists of any variety from people who want peace of any variety. So it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter whether they're queer or trans or of color or high class, low class, doesn't matter. If they want peace, they want peace. They want to live in women's country. If they want war, they're living outside. And that is bad news, and it doesn't matter who they are. Nobody has a right, is Tepper's point, to make war. Now, she does take this up in a much more... if you think this book is pretty raw, she takes it up much more in a book like, say, The Visitors or The Fresco, which are lighter in tone and happier books. This is pretty grim. It's got some pretty grim stuff in it. And so what we now have to confront, and this is where this lecture ends, is this question of essentialism, which is where Tepper has brought us.